In an upscale suburb of the Paris region, a residential area seemed frozen in time, where elegance blended with intimacy. Behind high wrought iron gates, paved paths led to villas with impeccable facades, lined with millimeter-trimmed hedges. Here, everything exuded discreet luxury, a controlled refinement where every detail, from the choice of rose bushes to the shine of the gravel under the wheels of the cars, testified to a meticulous concern to preserve an image of harmony and exclusivity. The silent streets, lined with retro lampposts and ornate iron benches, gave off a cozy atmosphere. Few passages, apart from a few sedans with tinted windows, the cars of domestic workers or carefully selected delivery men. Life in the neighborhood followed a codified rhythm. Morning joggers in matching outfits, nannies pushing state-of-the-art prams, and weekly residents' committee meetings where every change, no matter how small, was seriously scrutinized. This apparent calm, however, was only a facade. Behind the polite smiles and discussions about renovating facades or vacations in McGeeve, there were well-anchored mentalities, frozen in the comfort of the status quo. Here, belonging was not decreed. It was transmitted. We lived among ourselves, in a balance where anything new was perceived with a subtle, but very real, reserve. Residents liked the idea of progress as long as it did not disrupt their environment. And above all, as long as it did not call into question the idea they had of their community. It is in this context that Theo Dembele had just moved. Her house, a magnificent contemporary residence recently renovated, contrasted slightly with the more classic style of the other properties. With its large bay windows and light stone facade, it embodied a refined modernity, a discreet but undeniable symbol of a change that some neighbors observed with curiosity tinged with concern. Theo, however, had not sought to disturb this balance. A successful real estate entrepreneur, he built his empire with patience and determination. Coming from a modest background, he knew the value of work, the power of respect, and the importance of perseverance. He never asked anyone for anything, preferring to make his own way in a world where doors didn't always open willingly. Buying this house was just a logical step for him, a deserved reward after years of effort. He had not chosen this neighborhood to impress anyone, nor to seek acceptance from a closed circle. He simply wanted to enjoy the fruits of his labor, provide a peaceful environment for his family, and savor the comforts he had hard-earned. But he also knew that, for some, he would remain an anomaly. As soon as he arrived, he had noticed the furtive glances behind the slightly half-open curtains, the discussions that were interrupted when he passed, the forced smiles accompanied by two brief greetings. He wasn't paranoid. He was used to it. Too often in his career, he had seen contracts become complicated, decisions delayed, opportunities slip away for no apparent reason. He had learned to decipher silences, hesitations, polite excuses masking stubborn prejudices. The first days in the neighborhood had confirmed what he suspected. A neighbor, visibly surprised, asked him with a frozen smile if he was coming to visit, while he was unloading boxes from his trunk. Another resident, while walking his dog, stopped for a moment to look at his house before leaving without a word. Even the local shopkeepers, when he showed up at the neighborhood bakery, paused slightly when they heard his name before handing him their change with a mechanical smile. But Theo was not the type to let it get to him. He owed them nothing. He had nothing to prove. He had not bought this house to be accepted, but to live there fully. So he chooses to ignore the insistent looks, the barely veiled whispers, the greetings that are too formal to be sincere. Its success did not depend on their approval. And soon, they would all understand that he had no intention of being intimidated. One Saturday afternoon, under a bright sun, Theo decided to take advantage of the neighborhood's communal swimming pool, a luxurious space reserved for residents. When he arrived, he noticed families sitting on deck chairs, children playing in the water, and a few adults chatting in the shade of parasols. He sat down quietly, placed his towel on a deck chair and dove into the water.
The moment was pleasant, almost perfect.
But this moment of relaxation would be short-lived. As he swam, a woman elegantly dressed in a white sarong and luxury sunglasses approached him. Elise Moreau, a woman in her 50s, was an influential figure in the neighborhood. Always well-dressed, she ensured that the rules were respected and that the community retained its prestige. She leaned slightly towards Theo, displaying a polite but forced smile. "Excuse me, sir, but this swimming pool is reserved for residents." Theo raised his head and looked at her calmly. "I am a resident, madam." Elise's smile faded slightly. She studied him, as if looking for a flaw in his statement. "Ah. I've never seen anyone like you here," she replied in a tone of barely concealed condescension. "Are you sure you're not someone's guest?" Theo immediately understood where she was going with this. He could have gotten angry, but he knew this kind of situation well. "I live here, ma'am, and I have just as much right to be here as you do," he replied with implacable calm. But Elise did not give up. "What house number?" she asked sharply. A heavy silence settled around them. The air seemed to be charged with an invisible tension, as if everyone were holding their breath, watching what would happen next with a mixture of unease and curiosity. Some residents, who until then had been content to listen discreetly, feigned sudden interest in their phones or adjusted their sunglasses to hide their attention. Others, more daring, stared at the scene with barely veiled curiosity, savoring this moment of unexpected social confrontation. Theo held Elise's gaze for a moment before responding, with a smirk, almost amused by the situation. Number 12.
Aschade ran through the assembly.
A few murmurs were heard, muffled whispers between neighbors who exchanged surprised looks. Everyone knew number 12. It was the largest property in the neighborhood, an architectural gem nestled behind a long driveway lined with century-old trees. Bought at a record price a few months earlier, it remained a subject of conversation among residents, some speculating on the identity of the mysterious buyer, others wondering about his legitimacy in joining their closed circle. Elise, unsettled, blinked, frozen for a moment in her posture as self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood order. His confidence wavered. She was looking for an escape, a way to regain control of the exchange, to justify her intervention without appearing petty. It's strange, I know all the long-time residents," she stammered. "You must have moved recently." Theo nodded slowly, enjoying the way the tide was slowly turning in his favor. 3 months ago, in fact. A slight chuckle was heard from the crowd. A few neighbors exchanged knowing glances. The number 12 therefore belonged to this man, to this Theo Dembélé whom no one had really taken the trouble to approach. Elise, visibly uncomfortable, straightened her shoulders and adopted a new strategy, trying to keep up appearances. "Then you must not yet be aware of the strict rules of the neighborhood," she said with false kindness. "The swimming pool is not accessible to everyone. You must be a member of the Residents' Association and obtain an access card. Do you have one?" His tone, although more measured, betrayed a certain impatience, a last attempt to impose his authority and put Theo in his place. She still wanted to believe that he was not part of the circle, that an administrative detail would confirm her initial intuition. But this time, Theo couldn't help but smile. A calm smile, devoid of aggression, but charged with unshakable certainty. "Yes, of course," he replied, taking a card out of his bag.
"Here, check it out yourself."
Slowly, he held the card out towards her. Elise grabbed it with perceptible stiffness and examined it for a long time, her eyes scanning every detail, feverishly searching for the slightest irregularity, the slightest clue that would allow her to say that he had no place here. His gaze lingered on the name, then on the issue date. Everything was in order. She frowned slightly, biting the inside of her cheek as if to contain her annoyance. It wasn't supposed to be this way. With an annoyed pout, she handed the card back to him, her hand trembling slightly. The failure was bitter, but she had not yet found the words to get through it with dignity. Before she could say anything, a firm, calm voice sounded behind her, breaking the tension in an instant. "Elise, what is the problem here?" All eyes turned to a man in his 60s who had just arrived on the scene. His distinguished appearance, his impeccably styled salt-and-pepper hair and his soberly elegant navy blue polo shirt naturally commanded respect. François Lambert, president of the Residents' Association, was an undisputed authority figure in the neighborhood. As soon as she saw him, Elise immediately sat up, nervously adjusting her swimsuit as if to hide her confusion. She tried to maintain a confident posture, although there was a hint of worry in her eyes. "Francois, I just wanted to make sure that this gentleman was indeed a resident and had the right to the swimming pool," she explained in a falsely innocent tone, trying to regain control of the situation. She gave Francois a tight smile, hoping that he would agree with her or, failing that he would diffuse the situation in her favor. But to his great surprise, Francois turned to Theo with a broad smile, a sincere smile, the kind you reserve for people you really like. "Ah, but he's our new neighbor. Theo, I'm glad to see you here. I hope you are settling in well." An electric silence fell over the assembly. Elise turned pale, her confidence suddenly crumbling. You know him," she stammered, unable to hide her amazement. Francois gave him an intrigued look, as if the very question was absurd. "Of course," he replied with disarming naturalness. "Theo is not only a resident, he is also a major investor in the real estate sector. In fact, he recently bought the building where your office is located, Elise."
Visible shock crossed Elise's face.
His already pale complexion became livid. His lips parted in a gasp of surprise, but no sound came out. "Pardon," she finally said, her voice choked with disbelief. Francois shrugged his shoulders slightly, as if it were harmless information. "Yes, he's the new owner. I thought you already knew." The witnesses to the scene exchanged stunned looks. Some hid a smirk, amused by the reversal of the situation. Others looked at Elise with a mixture of embarrassment and disapproval, realizing the extent of her mistake. A heavy silence settled in, even heavier than that which had preceded the revelation. Theo, until then patient and measured, fixed a piercing gaze on Elise. He didn't need to raise his voice or express any resentment. His calm alone was enough to make everyone understand that he had won this confrontation without even having to defend himself. "I hope there is no longer any doubt about my right to be here, Elise," he said in a calm, almost benevolent voice, but full of implacable firmness. Elise opened her mouth, trying to formulate a response, but only an inaudible stammer passed her lips. His gaze avoided Theo's, unable to bear the shame that overwhelmed him. Finally, she lowered her head, turning on her heel hastily. Her steps were quick, almost clumsy, as she left the pool under the scrutiny of the other residents. Some looked at her with a disapproving pout, others exchanged low prayers, and one or two shook their heads, dismayed. From that day on, the neighborhood changed.
The conversation s'evolved.
Some neighbors, once locked in unconscious prejudices, began to see Theo in a new light. We welcomed him with more warmth. We saluted him with more respect. What had happened that day at the swimming pool remained etched in the memory, not as a simple incident, but as a collective awareness. The world was evolving, and with it, mentalities must follow. As for Elise, she kept her distance from Theo. When she passed him, she would lower her eyes slightly or settle for a forced smile, visibly uncomfortable. She never again sought to impose her authority on him, having understood too late the scope of her error. But one thing was certain. She would never forget this lesson in humility.